Did we meet Eric? I can still remember meeting
right here
him.
On the battlefield.
We met him on the battlefield.
Yeah.
But did we meet him during the shutdown, or was that just before?
No, it was right before the shutdown.
Just before, okay.
Because we were recording in the studio, and I did a live video that he watched, and then we went out on the battlefield, and you tried to blow your head off with the musket, remember?
I'm writing a historical novel near the 5th Ohio line. There's a little tiny cave, okay? And I brought my great-grandfather's musket to see if someone could fit in that cave for a while. And Eric just happened to be walking by as Matt and I were talking about it.
And as Bob was laying on the ground with the musket on his chest, and he's trying to pull the trigger with his
we
big
were trying
toe.
to recreate the Maryland guy who commits suicide.
Oh, my God.
Party field.
And then Eric comes up and he goes, "You must be Bob and Matt." No, it wasn't exactly like that.
The amazing thing is that he stayed with this after
I know.
actually seeing
The amazing thing is, later that day, he sent me a message and said, "Do you need help?" And now I think I misunderstood what he
It
meant.
was the wrong help. But
You
I'm
meant
here
like
for
the
you either way,
Wiz,
I guess.
didn't you? Eric, you were going to introduce us to the Wiz, weren't you?
Absolutely.
I thought
You were both going to see the Wizard.
I thought he meant, "Do you need help with the show?" But
And that's, ladies and gentlemen, how we got our executive producer, Eric Money.
You're welcome.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
hello, everybody. Welcome to Addressing Gettysburg's Ask a Gettysburg Guide number 19. And today we've got some interesting people. Of course, Bob Steenstra is with us, as always, but not always, but most times. Right, Bob? How are you today?
I'm fine, Matthew.
Now, you were all worried that you were going to stink because you had a bike tour today and you
probably
didn't
do.
go home and showered, but I haven't noticed.
Really?
I
Good.
think you smell fine.
Peggy, are you okay with this? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, luckily they manured the fields recently, so we can't tell the difference.
Hello, everybody. Just to take Matt off his train of thought.
And then sitting in with us on this very special Ask a Gettysburg Guide is Eric Money, our producer. Hello, Eric.
Super special. Hello, Matthew.
And our special guest, first time on the show, is licensed battlefield guide Rich Kohr. Hello, Rich.
Hello.
And I've been trying to get you on for like 2 years.
That is true.
Yeah, we finally got you on, and I'm glad to have you on. But before we get down to business, I'd like to remind you all that an effective way to help the show grow is to incessantly share links. I couldn't read my own typing there. Incessantly share links, like and subscribe, and leave 5-star reviews wherever you listen to podcasts if they allow you to do that. Tell every Gettys nerd you know about it, and if you can't stand the show, then be sure to push it on people that you hate. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook for live videos from the battlefield and more. And finally, I'd like to thank Bill Etzkorn for his generous donation when I saw him last week, and we just have to figure out what to do with it.
Bill is a great guy.
He is a great guy.
Darth is
Gave us
fantastic.
$100,000, which was amazing.
Say hi to
he
Delaney
didn't.
for me, Bill.
No, it wasn't 100,000. But anyway, so Rich, let's start with you first as a man. Rich Kohr, where are you from originally?
Originally from Lebanon, Pennsylvania.
Okay. So wait, now you were just bragging about being from Maryland.
I live in Emmitsburg now.
Yeah.
Lebanon, for those who may not know where Lebanon is roughly
Middle East.
75 miles from Gettysburg.
Okay. So how long have you been a guide?
This is my 26th year.
26th year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So what does that make you as far as standing, your status?
I'm considered emeritus.
Emeritus,
yeah.
okay. Do you get a special jacket for that, like golfers?
Trophy.
You
Trophy.
do? Okay, that's cool.
You got a trophy?
I got a trophy.
I didn't get a trophy.
You didn't get a trophy?
Oh, man, what does that
Are
say?
you sure you didn't get a trophy?
I got a trophy and a flip phone. That's what they gave me when I became emeritus. So.
A trophy and a flip phone. Well, there you go. Now, today we're talking about Stone's Brigade, and you're like the authority on Stone's Brigade.
That's the theory.
That's what I hear. That's what everybody tells me. So what drew you to Stone's Brigade? Do you have a connection to that? Or?
It comes back to Lebanon County. It goes back to my roots.
Okay.
We're going to get into this a bit later, but one of the unique aspects of this is the story of the colors of the 149th Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And the color guard and the entire color company, Company C of the 149th, did come from Lebanon County.
Okay.
So that's where my interest in the brigade started. And it started by researching that company and just kind of evolved to having to learn about the entire brigade.
Okay. And I think Bob has a question for you.
Yeah, before we go down that path, what are some famous people that you've given tours to, Rich?
Who, Bob? Who
In
are
the
some
26
famous
years of
people?
guiding here, right? Okay, who's
Yeah.
famous? Okay, probably the best known one, and this is why Bob is asking me the question, because he's seen me on tour with this individual, is Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas,
All right.
who every year makes it a habit of bringing his clerks at the end of the Supreme Court year to Gettysburg, and I've done the tour now probably 20. Well, this would have been probably the 21st consecutive year, but obviously COVID kind of messed that up. The other person I've had that some folks might know is Vince Dooley, who used to be the Georgia football coach.
Okay.
I had him on tour a number of years ago. That's about it.
It's one of those years, a lot of weird things happening.
But you cannot cancel Addressing Gettysburg because, ladies and gentlemen, we are outside, socially distanced.
More than 6 feet apart, except Eric's a little close. But other than that, we're more than 6 feet apart.
I assure you, I'm at least 6 feet away from Matt at all times.
And that's why I stink so bad after my bike tour, so everyone has to stay away.
Yeah, that's true. Real quick, when you have a famous person, have you ever had a famous person on a tour?
Congressman Arthur Ravenel.
That's the
Charleston,
11th Mississippi
Well, no,
story?
the guy who was responsible for the 11th Mississippi Monument, Billy Ross Brown, I gave a tour to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So politicians mainly?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And then you got Clarence Thomas and football.
And Clarence brings a big bus when he comes.
He brings his motorhome.
His motorhome, which
does
is a
he?
big bus.
Right.
And he has, you said he brings his staff with him or his clerks?
It's the clerks. They change clerks every year.
Yeah.
For
So
every
it's like
session.
a thanks a lot
Yeah, exactly.
kind of thing. Well, that's pretty cool.
But Clarence has been here a number of times.
He's been here a number of times.
For you, yeah.
He's kind of a Civil War guy.
He requests you.
Yes.
Well, that's pretty cool. Nobody requests me for anything. All right. Well, let's get started with a lead up to Stone's Brigade, their action or their part in the fight here at Gettysburg. First, give us a quick history of the brigade itself, and then July 1st and beyond.
Sure. Okay. Well, the brigade is the regiments that make up the brigade, which is the 143rd Pennsylvania, 149th Pennsylvania, and 150th Pennsylvania, are all recruited in the latter part of 1862. And to actually understand the whole Bucktail nickname, we have to go back to the original Bucktails, which was the 42nd Pennsylvania, also known as the 13th Pennsylvania Reserves. And
Is that also the first PA rifles?
Also first PA rifles, and also Kane's rifles.
Yes.
I don't know of any other regiment that had more names than they did. Okay, but yeah, we'll call them the 42nd PA today, just to simplify things. Okay.
Yeah.
But Roy Stone, who commands the brigade here, was a major in the 42nd Pennsylvania. And following the 7 days battles, the decision was made that he would be sent home to Pennsylvania on recruiting duty. And basically the theory was that if one Bucktail regiment is good, and they've developed kind of a reputation as being a hard-fighting regiment, an entire brigade of Bucktails will be even better.
Uh-huh.
So Stone was sent home with the intent that he was going to recruit 4 additional Bucktail regiments.
Okay.
He was able to recruit 2, which become the 149th and the 150th Pennsylvania. The only reason he couldn't recruit the full complement of 4 is Second Manassas. It takes place as he's recruiting, and following the Union defeat at Second Manassas, all recruiting in Pennsylvania was suspended. He was ordered to take the 2 regiments he had organized and head for Washington.
Okay.
Right.
So go ahead with it.
Okay. Yeah. And then they spend the winter in Washington. They actually don't join the Army of the Potomac until February of 1863. And the 143rd is not a Bucktail regiment. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along, because there's a little animosity there between the 143rd and the Bucktails at various points. But these 3 regiments are assigned to the 1st Corps. They're part of the 3rd Division, which is Doubleday's division. They're at Chancellorsville and very lightly engaged at Chancellorsville. Just do a little bit of very light skirmishing.
Okay.
So really, for all intents and purposes, when they walk onto the battlefield, literally where we're sitting right now by the Macpherson barn on July the 1st, 1863, this is their baptism of fire. This is their first battle.
Okay. So they've been in the service, but not under heavy fire before.
Precisely.
Okay.
June the 30th, they're camped along Middle Creek on the White Farm, which is really just to the north of the Pennsylvania-Maryland border.
Okay.
And they don't follow the route that the rest of the 1st Corps follows coming up to the battlefield. And everybody thinks about Reynolds' 1st Corps coming up on the battlefield. They always think about these guys marching up the Emmitsburg Road. Stone's brigade is off to the west of the Emmitsburg Road. That's where the White Farm was located. They come marching up via
Red Rock?
Bullfrog Road and the Millerstown Road.
Okay.
and they hit the Emmitsburg Road at the Peach Orchard. And then they follow the Emmitsburg Road north. About a mile south of town, they're met by a staff officer, probably from Reynolds. For some inexplicable reason, even though this is not video, I just pointed at Reynolds' statue. I have no idea why I did that, but I did.
Hey, can I interrupt for just a minute?
Does it make sense to us?
Sachs Covered Bridge?
They did march across Sachs Bridge.
Okay.
Yes.
So those
absolutely.
of you who can picture the covered bridge near the Eisenhower farm,
Right.
they're marching right over
because
that.
the old road would have been across Marsh Creek at the Sachs Bridge, whereas the new road's a little bit further upstream.
Okay.
So yeah, they march right past the Ike Farm, intersect what is now Confederate Avenue
Forgive
at
the
the Warfield
anachronism
House.
there. I
What's
said
that?
forgive the anachronism there.
That's okay. No, you're painting a word picture here, Bob. This is good. And like I said, when they're on the Emmitsburg Road, they find out there's a battle going on. And they did march cross country like the rest of the First Corps. They didn't march into town. And they arrived, they describe it as halting in front of the seminary. And a lot of folks don't realize this, but the front of the seminary in 1863 was the side that faced town. So I believe that they're between the seminary building and Gettysburg itself. And then they're met by Abner Doubleday, who gives them a little pep talk. And then they come marching out the Chambersburg Pike and go into position right here on the Macpherson farm.
And I read detail that their uniforms were black from all the sweat from running from.
More likely, yeah. They
Emmitsburg
apparently
Road.
ran the last mile or so until they got to the seminary. I mean,
And-
there's a great account of one of the guys, an officer in the 150th, William Dougal, who's described in the regimental history as the largest and most corpulent officer in the brigade. And apparently he couldn't keep up, and he dropped out somewhere in the fields down there, and they gave him the job of rounding up all the stragglers and making sure that they eventually made it to the battlefield, which he did.
So who would be the largest and most corpulent guest or co-host of Addressing Gettysburg?
It's me.
Wow,
It's me.
I think that might be me. So.
You? No, not you.
You just told me you biked 20 miles
Yeah.
for fun the
Well,
other
I've
day.
noticed this phenomenon after the shutdown. All of my guide shirts shrunk significantly, so I don't know what caused that. But so I might be vying for that title at this
COVID-19.
point too.
So I have a quick question, Rich. When Stone's Brigade moves out here onto the ridge, where are they going into line at?
They're actually just to the east of the Macpherson buildings,
Okay, so down basically along the farm lane.
along the farm lane, right? Exactly. So the 143rd led the 150th led the march because they're going to end up on the far left. They're between the Macpherson house and the woods where the Iron Brigade was positioned.
Okay.
Okay.
Then the 143rd was at the center of the brigade. They're basically between the house and the barn, but again, they're on the east side of the buildings. And then the 149th is on the farm lane itself, which is
Okay.
also on the east side of the barn.
And their right would be on the Chambersburg
The
Pike?
far
or-
right, 3 companies of the 149th were refused
Okay.
at right angles to the rest of the line on the south side of the Chambersburg Pike.
But still to the east of the
But
barn.
still to the east. And the reason they're doing that is just under a mile to the west of where we're sitting here by the Macpherson barn is Her Ridge.
Right.
And by the time they reach the field, there's at least 25 to 30 Confederate artillery pieces in action from Her Ridge. They're staying below the crest of the ridge, so they're out of sight of that.
Because they're not getting here at the beginning of the battle. They're getting here closer to noon,
They get
right?
here between 11 and noon. Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So the morning fight's over.
Oh, is that what you were going to say? Oh, okay. So they're down here for protection because it's lower ground. They're
Right.
not up. They're in between ridges.
Exactly.
So they're down there for protection while artillery's flying. There's no infantry action going on.
No.
But then doesn't Stone order skirmishers forward?
He sends a company from each regiment out to what is now the old Gettysburg Country Club site.
Okay.
On the west side of Willoughby Run, and that's just essentially to make contact with Confederates.
Right. Okay. And so what goes on after that?
They're probably in position about 30 minutes or so, and they start to take artillery fire from Oak Hill. So this gives us a little bit of a timeline here that, the Confederates are arriving on Oak Hill sometime between noon and 1 p.m.
So wait, now for the listener, so we're at the Macpherson barn. If you could picture that, if you can't, well, picture, we're facing, if we're Stone's Brigade, we're facing to the west. Just
Right.
make up a northeast, southwest map in your mind. And Oak Hill is to the north.
Yeah, approximately a mile.
So about a mile to the north. So what the west can't see, the north can?
Exactly.
Okay.
Even though they're behind the ridge, which shields them from view of the batteries to the west, the batteries on Oak Hill can clearly see that line. And they're quite literally firing down the length of the line. You know, I always tell people, you could have been the worst gunner in Robert E. Lee's army. You're going to hit somebody in Stone's brigade, because even if you overshoot the target, there's somebody who's going to catch it further down the line.
Yes.
So Stone makes the first of several moves as far as shifting his regiments around. The 150th and the 143rd just moved up the slope a few yards and put the barn between their right flank and the Confederate artillery on Oak Hill.
Okay.
The 149th repositions, so the entire regiment now ends up in a ditch along the southern edge of the Chambersburg Pike. They're facing north. The other two regiments are still facing west.
Okay.
And this is so they can't be enfiladed.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So you're saying the 143rd was just right out here in this
right? Yeah.
yard
just
that
a
we're
few
looking
yards
at?
from where we're sitting.
Okay.
Matter of fact, there's a carving. There's two carvings on the barn. They're on the southern side of the barn, and I wish I could claim that I found these, but I did not. These were actually discovered by another battlefield guide, our friend Dave Richards, and his son, who actually found this a number of years ago. And Dave wrote an excellent article in, I believe, in Blue and Gray magazine, where he actually identified these guys. There's initials carved on the barn, 143rd PVI, and the date September 12th, 1889.
Right.
Which is the day after the 143rd Pennsylvania Monument was dedicated. And one initial is SMG. Can't remember the other one. JCT.
Okay.
JCT. It's Jonas C. Tubbs and Singleton M. Goss.
Oh.
And Dave actually found these
Great
guys
names.
on a roster of veterans of the 143rd who were present
Wow.
at the dedication of the monument.
That's cool.
Yeah. So,
And I noticed that their people keep touching them, and they're starting to get smoothed away.
yeah.
So please don't touch them when you come here, please. Thank you. Okay.
Look at 'em.
continue. Look at them, but don't touch them.
Right.
Okay. So let's move on now with.
Okay, so they've changed position here. 143rd and 150th are in good shape. They're still out of sight of all the Confederate artillery that's firing into this area. The 149th finds itself in a pretty precarious situation because the far left end of the regiment, after they are repositioned onto the Chambersburg Pike, ends up on the crest of, I guess we'll call it West Macpherson's Ridge, roughly where Stone Avenue and the Chambersburg Pike intersect today. And that puts them in line of sight of the guns on her ridge, and now they start taking artillery fire from the guns west of here.
So they were being enfiladed from their right, from Oak Hill to the north. Good news, you're no longer enfiladed, but those guns on hers ridge to the west are now hitting you at a right.
Right, and one of the officers who writes extensively about this is the commander of Company C of the 149th, John Bossler. And he said that we had jumped from the frying pan and landed in the fire.
Good
because there was probably 2 to 3 batteries of Confederate artillery in operation on Oak Hill. Maybe 12 guns total. But when they change position, they're coming under fire from at least 24 Confederate artillery pieces.
Jeez.
So, and it caused a lot of casualties in the brigade from that artillery fire. And it's one of those scenarios where if you're the Confederates, all you can see is the left end of the line.
Right.
But that tells you where the rest of the line is.
Yeah.
So they're able to just fire down that line. There's several very graphic accounts from guys in the regiment describing, one officer is literally torn in half by an exploding shell.
Captain Sofield from Company
was
A.
on the far right end of the line.
Yeah, and he's
So
buried.
he's on the far right. He's down the lowest point.
Okay.
And he gets torn in half by a shell that comes underneath him.
and he's buried, I think, in row B in the Pennsylvania
In the
section.
Pennsylvania plot in the National Cemetery, yes.
And are the colors right now right in the middle of the regiment?
Colors somehow, and I'm still trying to sort this one out in my mind, but somehow when they made this shift, the colors ended up on the far left of the regiment. And I honestly don't know how that happened.
So they're up on the hill.
They're up on the hill.
So it's like waving to the Confederates.
Exactly.
Here.
Exactly.
In case you can't see the men, here's our
Here's
flag.
the colors. Here's a nice landmark. And this, of course, is what leads to what's commonly referred to as the color incident of the 149th Pennsylvania.
Right.
And I've never found another incident that parallels this, throughout the history of the war. I'm sure somebody who's listening to this.
I think we actually have a question about that, so we'll get into that.
Okay, we'll get into that. But the bottom line is what happened here is the colors were sent away from the rest of the regiment.
Right.
They were ordered across the pike to a point to the left front of the regiment over the crest of the ridge. They're definitely on the western slope of what I refer to as West Macpherson's Ridge. There was a wheat field in front of them, so the men couldn't be seen, but the flags could be seen over the wheat. And the bottom line is they're essentially moved out there to draw the artillery fire away from the position of the regiment.
How'd you like to have that job?
Yep.
Okay.
How effective is that?
It worked. The several officers, Stone mentions this, Bossler mentions it, that this did effectively draw the fire away from the main line of the regiment. And the absolute miracle here is none of the 6 members of the color guard are killed or wounded by artillery fire.
Yeah.
Even though they're the target of an awful lot of Confederate artillery.
So there's something like 30 Confederate guns on Hare Ridge plugging away at an empty field.
Pretty much.
Nice.
Yeah.
Much. Yeah.
Now, all of this stuff is happening, and this is all just to get away from artillery fire, right? There's no contact with any infantry at this point.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
When does that come about?
That happens shortly after the colors move to their position.
Okay.
And the Confederate attack that's really going to occupy Stone's brigade for most of the afternoon comes from Oak Hill. And it's going to be 3 regiments of Junius Daniel's brigade, starting out from somewhere just behind where the Peace Light Monument is today, marching due south. And this is probably where we should talk about the railroad cut.
Yeah.
Because the railroad cut is approximately 180 yards to the north of the Chambersburg Pike. So it's in front of the 149th Pennsylvania. When Daniel's brigade starts to move down from the north, the 143rd Pennsylvania gets shifted over, and they take position to the right of the 149th. So you now have 2 regiments along the pike facing north, and the 150th is still in their position beyond the farm buildings.
Okay. So go ahead, move on. With
Okay. So for reasons that aren't entirely clear, the commander of the 149th, and when Stone was given command of this brigade in February of 1863, when they were assigned to the Army of the Potomac, he had, up to that point, he had commanded the 149th Pennsylvania. The lieutenant colonel now takes over the regiment, and this is Walton Dwight. And Dwight was from Potter County. He was involved in the lumber business up there. He's very young. He's 23 years of age. And he's described by the officers in the 149th as a very effective officer, except for his fondness for strong drink. And supposedly that's what triggers what happens next, because Dwight orders the 149th to move into the railroad cut. Now, the basic problem with this, if you start at John Buford statue and John Reynolds statue out here on the First Days Field and walk straight across the field to the railroad cut, what you're going to discover when you get there is the cut's about 30 feet deep. Yeah. So these guys end up down in that hole as the Confederates are still advancing towards them.
And it's not just that it's 30 feet deep. It's like sheer.
Yeah, the sides are vertical.
Like, yeah, you're either jumping in or falling in or sliding in. Yeah. So.
And one officer said that where Dwight is located on the line, which was more towards the right end of the line, the cut was only about 4 feet deep. So he said, there it's perfect. There it's, like natural breastworks, right?
Yes.
But where it's 30 feet deep, these guys are trying to scale the side of the cut and then hang on the edge.
Right, because they got to get down one side and then climb up the other.
Exactly.
So most of our visitors can probably visualize the railroad cut where the bridge goes over.
Right.
Compare the two. Are they pretty comparable?
Pretty much the same. Every time the unfinished railroad bed hit one of these ridges, there was a cut. Yeah. And, the cuts are about the same depth.
And this is the cut through West McPherson's Ridge.
West McPherson's Ridge.
The more famous railroad cut that more people are aware of is East McPherson's Ridge.
Exactly.
Okay. Yep. So then there's some fighting over there.
Yeah, there's a couple of Confederate attacks that move down from the north. And I'm not going to get into a blow-by-blow description here because we just don't have time to do it. Okay,
yeah.
but
we'll
the bottom line is
questions.
The Confederate assaults towards the railroad cut seem to run into some problems because they're confused by where the colors are located. So they're firing towards where they see the flags, but the flags are not in the same position as the regiment. So the first couple of Confederate attacks coming from the north kind of bogged down about 100 yards or so on the north side of the cut. Where the 149th in particular, which is sitting out there in the cut, runs into problems is when some of that artillery over on Her Ridge sees this line of troops parked in the railroad. And there's one particular battery that would have been on the north side of the Chambersburg Pike, rolls a couple of Napoleons down the railroad bed and starts firing canister literally into the cut and into the left flank of the 149th. And this is one of the few times in the battle where Confederate guns are actually firing canister.
Yeah.
And they're firing it offensively.
Yeah.
Which gives you an idea of how close the range is here. And that forced the 149th out of the cut, and then they fell back to their original position on the Chambersburg Pike.
Did they have an easy time getting out?
Not at all.
No. I would imagine.
There's guys. I've gone through the rosters here and looked at some of the morning reports down the National Archives, looked through individual soldier records. There's at least 2 or 3 guys in the 149th who suffer broken arms because they fell backwards into the cut as they were trying to get out. Those poor guys end up being captured. There's probably about 30 or 40 members of the regiment who got trapped in the cut and couldn't get back out.
I mean, because you're climbing out, and that's hard enough, but then the canister's still firing.
Right, and eventually the Confederates advance up to the edge of the cut when Stone's brigade pulls back. Because they've now seen where the regiment is.
Right.
And
so now they're firing into their backs.
Right. Right.
Man.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So then they fall back.
Fall back. Now, and thing to remember here is while all this is going on, the colors are still sitting out there in the field all by themselves.
Oh, I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So they're sitting out there kind of away from the main action. There is a counterattack made by the 149th back to the cut because now the Confederates have moved into the cut and they're able to dislodge the Confederates from the cut. This time they don't stay there. They pull back to the Chambersburg Pike. Somewhere during the course of that phase in the action, Stone is wounded, suffers a gunshot wound to the pelvis. Walton Dwight is wounded, the colonel of the 149th, and also Captain Bossler of the Color Company, because he's the one that actually ordered the flags to go out to their position. He's wounded. So these guys are all knocked out of action. So we're starting to see, casualties mounting, not just in the regiment, but also amongst the officers.
Right. Okay.
So to kind of fast forward here, the Confederates. Well, excuse me, I should mention this. I almost forgot about this part. There is one more Confederate attempt to dislodge Stone's brigade from the area around the railroad cut, and this also shows us that the position of the colors is not just confusing Confederate artillery at this stage in the fight, it's confusing Confederate infantry. Junius Daniels sends a regiment, the 32nd North Carolina, to cross the railroad considerably to the west of where the cut is. They're basically crossing the railroad where it's almost level with the surrounding fields. And then once they get across the railroad, they wheel to their left, so they're now heading east. And they basically march towards the flags. And if you read the report of the colonel of the 32nd North Carolina, he says they did this in order to outflank the regiment in their front. Well, the basic problem is they're not outflanking anybody except 6 guys and 2 flags. They're actually marching right in front of the line of Stone's brigade.
Oh, okay.
And this is where the 150th Pennsylvania re-enters the fight.
Presumably, the canister from the Confederate artillery recognizes this as a friendly
ceased
unit?
At this point.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no friendly fire that we know of, at this point. But the 150th Pennsylvania starts to move into line with the 149th. They're now on the left of the 149th.
While all that was going on at the railroad cut, the 150th is out here.
Yeah, they're
facing
just
west.
behind where I'm sitting here.
Okay.
By the bunker.
Okay. So
Yep.
they're still on the
kind of
reverse
behind
slope
the
here,
ridge in a sheltered area.
facing west and not involved at the railroad cut.
And I think what it boils down to is everyone starts to realize at this stage that the threat's coming from the north and there's no threat coming from the west.
Right.
The Confederate troops on Hers Ridge are not active. They're just sitting out there kind of watching this all unfold in front of them. So at this point, the brigade is now commanded by the colonel of the 150th, Langhorne Worcester. He orders his regiment to shift to the north. So now the entire brigade ends up lined up along the Chambersburg Pike facing north.
Okay.
Okay. And the 32nd North Carolina marches right in front of the 150th. And they get hit by a counterattack on their right flank, which forces the 32nd to retreat to the north across the railroad cut.
Okay. All right.
So,
All right.
And
does this essentially end Stone's brigade's?
the fighting in that area, yeah. The fighting between the Pike and the railroad cut pretty much ends with the repulse of the 32nd North Carolina.
Okay.
There is an attack at the end of the day coming from the west, which is the Virginia troops under Brockenbrough.
Okay.
And the entire brigade, what's left of it by this stage, does shift and faces west. And eventually is forced out of this position back to the Macpherson barn, back to East Macpherson's Ridge, and eventually back to Seminary Ridge.
Okay.
In the confusion of that retreat, the color guard is forgotten about.
They're still out there.
They're still out there.
Oh, jeez.
So, the battle is now moving, from west to east through this area. And the color guard just happens to be in a seam between two advancing Confederate lines.
Oh, my God.
So there's no Confederates advancing directly at them.
Right.
So they're just kind of sitting out there. And I can always visualize what's going on here. We've got the color bearer is Henry Brem. He's the color sergeant, so he's in charge of the guard. There's a corporal by the name of Frank Lehman carrying the second flag. You've got 4 guards with him. And according to one of the color guard, he said there was a heated discussion about what they should do at this point because it starts to get quiet around them. Okay, so obviously the fighting is no longer taking place near them.
Right.
And Brem says, well, we were ordered out here and we were told to stay here until we were recalled. We haven't been recalled. So he sends one of the members of the color guard, Frederick Hoffman, back for orders, and Hoffman can't find the regiment because it's left the Macpherson property. By the time he spots it, he can't get back to the color guard because Confederates have come in between him and the color guard. So he ends up falling in with the regiment and eventually gets wounded and captured, I believe, in town once the retreat takes place.
Okay.
So
what happened? Did they get captured? Or?
Eventually. There's a small group of Confederates at the foot of West Macpherson's Ridge, down along Willoughby Run, who are members of Davis's brigade. So these are Mississippians.
Okay.
Some of them are from 2nd Mississippi, some from the 42nd. And they see these flags up on the ridge in front of them, see Confederate troops advancing on either side of them, have absolutely no idea why this Union regiment isn't responding to the threat of being outflanked. So they decide, well, we might as well go up there and take a look. And it's about half a dozen guys. They creep up through this wheat field, get to the edge of the wheat, kind of peek out through the wheat, and there's a pile of fence rails there that had been torn down earlier in the fight. And the color guards kind of hunker down behind these fence rails. So one of the Confederates wrote about this, a guy by the name of Frank Price, and he said, there's these fence rails. He said, there's 2 flags sticking up. I don't see anybody around them. So he said, we figured this would be the easiest capture of battle flags in the history of the war, so we made a rush towards the flags. And they made the one mistake, I consider a mistake. They did what every good Confederate soldier does when he's going to attack something, the rebel yell.
The rebel yell, gave it away.
And it gives the color guard just this split-second warning that these Confederates are heading right at them.
Huh. And then they get into a little scuffle.
They get into a nasty little hand-to-hand fight.
Yeah.
I mean, this is legitimate hand-to-hand fighting. One Confederate soldier is apparently killed by Sergeant Brem with his bare hands.
Yeah.
During the course of this scuffle. That's a lieutenant by the name of Atlas Roberts, who was in the 2nd Mississippi.
Great name.
Sorry, it is a great name. Sergeant Price ends up in a tug of war for the blue regimental flag, which was carried by Frank Lehman. Price says he got a hold of the flag and he jumped back over the fence rails, and Lehman gets knocked down to his knees. And Lehman wrote about this too. This is the nice thing about this. We've got accounts from both sides, and they actually agree.
Okay,
which usually doesn't happen. Okay, and Lehman says he's on his knees. He's holding the flagstaff in his right hand. Price has the flagstaff, at the top on the other side of the fence rails, and they're kind of pulling back and forth for control of it. But Lehman said he was at a definite disadvantage because he couldn't use both hands. And that's because there's another Confederate soldier standing on the fence rails aiming a musket at his chest.
Oh, jeez.
And he grabs that gun barrel with his left hand, and he's kind of trying to push that away from him and try to pull the flag back with his right hand. And he hears a gun go off, and the Confederate is trying to shoot him, drops. And he looks to his left, and there's one of the color guard, a 17-year-old kid named Henry Spade, who shot the Confederate who was trying to shoot Lehman.
Nice.
At that point, Lehman lost his grip on the flag. So Frank Price now has the flag. Spade goes after him. Jumps over the fence rails, takes off across the field after this Confederate, throws his musket at him and whacks him in the back of the head.
Oh, geez.
And as Spade put it, at that point, he let go of the flag. So Spade picks up the flag. He and Lehman take off. They're running pretty much right along the edge of the Chambersburg Pike, and they both get hit by Confederate fire from the Macpherson buildings. And they're both wounded. They both go down. The flag does get captured by Price, the sergeant who went after it in the first place, from the 42nd Mississippi.
how does July 1st end for them?
No, we still got more.
Oh, you got more. I'm sorry.
there's
I'm
more.
sorry.
We still haven't dealt with Henry
Keep on
Brem and the
going,
other
then.
flag. Okay, those
Oh,
poor
that's
guys
right.
are
There's
still
the
out
other
there.
flag. All right, go ahead.
And Brem and the other two members of the Color Guard, John Hamill and John Friedel, managed to fend off this group of Confederates, and now they're running for their lives.
With the national colors.
With the national colors. And they run right into the Macpherson lane because they see a line of troops positioned in the Macpherson lane. And remember, that's where the 149th was earlier.
Right.
But the troops they see in the lane are facing to the west. They're facing the barn. Well, it turns out this is a line of battle of a Confederate unit, the 55th Virginia. The reason they're facing west is they passed by the barn, then took fire from behind them from Union troops who were in the barn, and they swung around to deal with that.
Oh, okay.
And, you just think about how much smoke there is on the field.
Yeah.
And the dust and the confusion. These guys see troops facing west. Well, that's got to be friendly troops, right? And they run right into the middle of them and then realize...
Jesus.
These guys are wearing a different color uniform than the one I'm wearing. This is probably not going to end well. They get through the Confederate line. The two color guards, John Friedel and John Hamill, draw fire intentionally away from Brem. They're both hit. Hamill is mortally wounded. Friedel shot through the lung, but he survives.
Wow.
And Brem is clear. He gets away from this and makes it to... we'll call it East Macpherson's Ridge, where Reynolds Avenue is today, and gets hit in the back by a stray shell fragment.
Okay.
Probably fired by one of the guns up on Oak Hill. And goes down. Member of the 55th Virginia scoops up the flag, and so both flags end up being captured. Every member of the color guard is killed or wounded or taken prisoner.
Wow. Not a good day for them.
Not a good day for the color guard.
How about the rest of Stone's Brigade?
They eventually make a brief stand by the seminary. Eventually are forced back into town with the rest of the First Corps, and eventually make what's left of the brigade makes its way back to Cemetery Hill.
Okay.
And then they regroup, probably in Evergreen Cemetery. They're not 100% clear as to where they are that night, but it seems as though they're in the cemetery itself.
And then where are they placed online, and what happens July 2nd and 3rd for them?
On July the 2nd, they remain kind of in reserve on Cemetery Hill. They do get shifted down the ridge, down into the area where the U.S. Regulars Monument is today.
Okay.
Late in the second day, advance out to the Emmitsburg Road. They spend part of the evening of July the 2nd on the skirmish line along the Emmitsburg Road after the second day's fighting is largely over. Then they're relieved from the skirmish line. They're in reserve just behind Cemetery Ridge on July the 3rd. They're going to lose maybe a couple dozen guys during the artillery barrage prior to Pickett's charge.
Okay.
And then they remain in reserve behind the Union line during the course of Pickett's charge. They're never actually engaged on the
So their big day is July
the 1st.
1st.
Yeah. And
okay.
most people, when they're driving north on Hancock Avenue, their attention is to the west.
Right.
But if you look to the right, you will see some of the Bucktail. Some of how many are there?
There's three. There's
Three.
a regiment.
Okay.
There's a secondary monument
For
to
each one.
each of the three regiments that fought out here
Near the Regulars Monument.
near the Regulars Monument.
Rich or Eric, what casualties do we know did the Stone's Brigade suffer?
I know the 149th off. I should have brought my little cheat sheet with me. You might be able to help me. But I know the
think-
149th loses 336 men out of 450.
Yeah, it's something like I think 74.7%
Yeah.
for the 149th.
Yeah. 150th loses. They start out with just under 400, and I think they lose about 220 or so.
Yeah,
And-
I was thinking they were high 60s,
Yeah.
maybe low 70 percentage.
Yeah, and then the 143rd is
like mid 60
about 60%.
percentage. Yeah.
And were these
According-
full-strength regiments, had they reached 1,000 or so men
Well,
ever?
Earlier, but here they're not. The 149th has 450 guys online.
Okay.
The 150th has about 400, and I think the 143rd is the biggest regiment. They had 465.
Okay, so for point of comparison, listeners, these are big regiments because they
By
have
Gettysburg
not
standards.
right by Gettysburg
Yeah.
standards.
Well,
they're big regiments.
they lose a fair number of guys when they're in garrison at D.C., but they're not really doing
Right.
any hard duty prior
They're
prior to
losing
the
guys to
Chancellorsville
disease.
campaign.
Matt is just like chomping at the bit there because he's got the casualty
I've
figures.
got
there
well
we
from
go,
the Brigades
Matthew.
of Gettysburg, 149th, 143rd, 149th, 150th, 109 casualties, 465 in the 149th, and 279 for a total of 853 losses out of 1317. So 65%, according to this book.
For the whole brigade.
Yeah, for the entire brigade.
And we can assume that the vast majority of those were on day
probably
one.
over 90% of that is day one.
Yeah, but they really only talk about losing a handful of guys wounded. I don't know.
143rd has the heaviest losses on the third day. I know they lost 17 guys during the cannonade.
Yeah, they talk about.
They were right behind a Union battery. I think they're right behind Rorty's battery.
Yeah,
which is
well,
why
they
get hit.
had built breastworks there, where you see their monuments now, roughly in that area.
Yeah, 149th and 150th are just losing just a couple guys on July the 3rd.
Most of those guys are getting hit by pieces of stones that are getting thrown off of the rocks in the breastworks from incoming artillery.
Think outside the bus and let Getty's Bike Tours show you the only way to truly experience Gettysburg. There's a reason why Getty's Bike Tours is the longest running bicycle tour company in Gettysburg, and that's because they put the customer's experience at the top of their list of priorities. Follow a licensed battlefield guide through some of the most legendary ground in American history. There's a tour route for everyone, from the newbie to the hardcore history buff. So go to gettysbike.com or call 717-752-7752 and book your reservation today. Mention Addressing Gettysburg and receive 10% off your tour. That's gettysbike.com or 717-752-7752. Discount does not apply to rentals.
Victorian Photography Studio, located on Steinwar Avenue in historic downtown Gettysburg, is a vintage tintype and digital portrait studio. With hundreds of dresses and uniforms as well as period-correct props and backgrounds, VPS can help you capture the perfect moment in time. As one of the few remaining practitioners of the craft, the photographers at VPS are trained in the history and artistry of wet plate collodion photography. So stop on in or book online for a truly unique Gettysburg experience. Go to VictorianPhotographyStudio.com and follow them on Facebook and Instagram at VPS_Gettysburg. That's VictorianPhotographyStudio.com and at VPS_Gettysburg on social media.
Gettysburg, a nation divided. The battle that changed America. Avatars, generals, artifacts, games, 360-degree views, an immersive battlefield experience. A new way to discover history. Gettysburg, a nation divided, an augmented reality, narrated by Scott Eastwood.
Download it from your phone's app store today and support Addressing Gettysburg by entering GBurg1863 in the referral code prompt after downloading.
All right, so let's move on to the questions from our patrons over at patreon.com. If you want to ask questions, that'll be read on the show. Of course, become a patron over at patreon.com/Addressing Gettysburg. Okay, so starting us off is Bill Etzkorn. He says, were the requirements to be in the Bucktails different than being in the United States Sharpshooters?
Yes.
All right, next question.
Quite a bit different.
Quite a bit different. Yeah, the sharpshooters, you actually had to be a good shot to get into, whereas the Bucktails, you didn't. Okay. There's kind of this mystique, and it's part of the mythology of the original Bucktails, is that to become a member of the original Bucktails, you had to have killed a deer. And so I think that's where this question probably comes from.
And even that itself is kind of a myth, because the gentleman who actually gave the Bucktails their symbol was a guy named James Landrigan. And the deer tail he put on his hat, he stole from a butcher shop across the street from the recruiting station.
Exactly. Yeah, so it seems like Landrigan sees this deer hanging in the butcher shop, hacks the tail off and pins it to his hat. Everybody in his company then runs across the street and manages to acquire a piece of deer fur off this poor carcass, and they pin that to their hats. And by the time they get to Camp Curtin, I mean, I can see how this plays out. They're probably riding on the train going, now remember, when we get to Camp Curtin, if anybody asks, we all had to kill a deer to get into this unit, right? So you guys are all clear on that, right?
I love it.
And
thank you.
But anybody who knows who's driven in Pennsylvania knows how easy it is to kill a deer.
But all these wonderful stories I've been telling for all these years about shooting a buck and cutting the tail. This is one that I could sort of tell, but it's funnier this way.
Yeah.
It's better. And it reminds me of Matt. This is exactly the kind of thing that Matt would do.
There's actually a guy within Company I of the 13th Reserves who he actually does pretty good business.
Oh, the Bucktail broker.
See, exactly. He's selling. He's getting cases of 100, 200 Bucktails at a time, express shipped to him, and selling them at like $1 a pop to other guys in the regiment whose original tails have been lost or destroyed.
He had a friend in Potter County who was a professional hunter. The guy hunted venison for restaurants.
Okay.
So this guy's got this.
It's a bonanza for him.
Yeah, he's got a warehouse full of Bucktails, and he's like, exactly. He's writing home and saying, "Hey, send me 24 Bucktails. I got a bunch of guys that need them."
Eric, did you get a picture of your own 149th Pennsylvania Bucktail hat when you were taking live feed before?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I don't get on the camera,
Eric's
Bob.
like Wilson on Home Improvement.
Okay.
You'd never see his face.
If you'll note, I'm rarely ever recorded
right
on purpose. But for the sake of this particular episode, I absolutely had to be.
Eric loves
this
this
stuff.
this brigade. But I do think it would be a good idea to take a photograph and post it on your Instagram or wherever you post it, Matt, of Eric or just the hat, maybe, if you're that camera shy. I think it would be fun to put the Bucktail by the ponytail and get the picture. Rich Kohr has a nice ponytail.
The reason Rich Kohr has a nice ponytail is several years ago, people started telling me I was beginning to look like Dan Sickles. So I needed to do something to change my look dramatically.
That'll do it.
So,
I had someone tell me I looked like Mitt Romney when he was running for president.
Yeah, kind of. And you have the same kind of like voice that he has. Yeah.
So there's even
I always get Brad Pitt.
And it just occurred to me while Matt was talking about somebody lying to him and saying he looks like Brad Pitt, that there's actually a substantial difference in armament between the original Bucktails and Stone's Brigade.
Do tell.
The 149th and 150th here, and I think through the entire war, for the most part, they're armed with pattern 53 English Enfields. The original Bucktails do not. They're armed with Sharp's breech-loading rifles by the time Gettysburg
the first
rolls
Pennsylvania
around.
Rifles and Kane's Rifles.
Exactly. And they have Sharp's rifles through most of their enlistment. They get them. Really, they get the first ones. They stole them from Berdan's down on the Peninsula campaign at Harrison's Landing, and then more or less forced the War Department to supply them with a full regiment's worth after that.
Was the rest of the brigade that the real Bucktails were a member of? Did they also have the same?
Bucktails, not real Bucktails.
First Bucktails. Okay.
No, they're not.
Units.
They're part of McCandless's brigade here, which has the first reserves, which are actually armed with 1842 Springfields. They're big 69 caliber guns, and everybody else is kind of armed with a mix of 61 Springfields and 53 Enfields.
Okay, so most of the guys, except the first, have rifles, but the 13th has breech-loading rifles.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to Brian Emmert's question. He has two, actually. He says, what did Corporal Renzinger of the 150th do that earned him the Medal of Honor? And where did the brigade end up on the evening of the 1st and the day of the 2nd, which we covered that before. And talk about the casualties. We already did that, too. So let's just go with this one about Corporal Renzinger. Renzinger, how do you say it?
Yeah, Renzinger. Mo Renzinger, or Ro Renzinger. It's actually Monroe is his name. And to be honest, we really don't know what he did to earn the Medal of Honor. It's very ambiguous. First of all, he is the last Medal of Honor awarded for the Battle of Gettysburg prior to Cushing.
Okay.
A few years ago. He got his in 1907. And
was he still living?
Yeah, he was still alive. It was by a special act of Congress. So this may be actually the last Congressional Medal of Honor. You know, Congress gets taken out of the mix right around that time period. If I remember correctly, I was trying to go through the ridiculous amount of material I've accumulated from Stone's Brigade over the years, but I believe that he applied for the Medal of Honor twice and was rejected twice before it's finally awarded to him.
So he himself applied?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know you could do that. I thought someone
at that time, people are trying to, they're lobbying the War Department for a Medal of Honor. They're lobbying Congress for a Medal of Honor. Yeah.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
A lot of those Medals of Honor that are awarded 1890 and later are somebody's pulling in some political favors and that sort of thing.
Interesting. Okay.
But he is mentioned in the official report of the commander of the 150th, Henry Heide Cooper. for showing conspicuous bravery, but Hy Cooper does not mention specifically what he did. We know he was part of the color guard of the 150th. The color guard of the 150th gets shot up pretty badly. They're all killed and wounded by the end of the day. Renzinger gets wounded a couple of times, apparently, before he has to, drop out of the ranks just because of the nature of the injuries. But to be honest, even the regimental or the Medal of Honor citation is very ambiguous. It just talks about, his exceptional gallantry under fire.
Huh.
That's not even that odd for that time period, though. You can read a lot of those old Medal of Honor citations, and they're one or two liners.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, it's not, he threw himself on an exploding shell and saved the lives of,
the
surrounding soldiers. It's not like today.
See, I thought there had to be like a detailed story along with it in order to get it.
Guys that captured a perfect example. James Thompson, Company G, 13th Reserves, gets the Medal of Honor for July 3rd because he captured the colors of the 15th Georgia, and that's all his Medal of Honor citation
Well, that's enough.
Captured the colors of the 15th Georgia.
That's enough.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't need to know how. I just need to know that.
Well, in some cases,
But
it was
conspicuous gallantry is
There's
so.
an Indiana guy over on East Cemetery Hill who captures a flag on the morning of the 3rd from one of the North Carolina regiments because the color bearer got shot during the night fighting on East Cemetery Hill, and the next morning when the sun comes up, he looks back over his shoulder and sees this flag laying on the ground. He gets over and picks it up, and he ends up, being awarded the Medal of Honor.
Right. Okay.
So yeah.
Excuse me. Jamie Clifton wants to know if you would explain the difference between the bucktails and the bogus bucktails.
Okay, this is what Bob was erroneously referring to just a moment ago. The real bucktails and the bogus bucktails. This seems to be largely a post-war phenomena.
Okay.
Whereas the original bucktails, the veterans of the 42nd Pennsylvania, are getting upset that the 149th and the 150th is calling themselves Bucktail regiments. 1870s, 1880s. This even gets addressed in the various regimental histories. The 42nd Pennsylvania regimental history addresses it. So does the 150th regimental history. And it just seems to be something that started with middle-aged veterans kind of looking back on their military service, and the guys in the 42nd are, well, we're the real bucktails and you guys are the bogus bucktails. Okay. The simple fact of the matter is, it was the colonel of the original bucktails, Hugh McNeil, who came up with this idea of sending Stone, who's an officer in the original bucktails, home to recruit 4 more bucktail regiments. And the letter that McNeil wrote to Governor Curtin says they're going to wear the bucktail symbol and they will be referred to as bucktails. Mm-hmm. So this was, right there from the very beginning that they were going to be modeled on the original regiment. And during the war, relations between the 149th and the 42nd seemed to be pretty good because the 42nd Pennsylvania lost their flag in Virginia in 1862. The members of the 149th Pennsylvania chipped in and bought them a replacement flag. So, that doesn't seem like there's a lot of animosity.
Right.
They end up carrying the presentation color. It's what we call it, the presentation color, through the rest of their enlistment. And then when the reserves are folded into the 190th and 191st in 1864, the 190th PA continues to carry the presentation color from the 149th until they're actually issued their own regimental colors by the state.
Okay.
So for a few months, they're still flying the colors that the 149th presented to the 13th Reserves.
Yep.
All right. Matt McClanahan says, Roy Stone served very ably at Gettysburg, and President Lincoln himself nominated him for promotion in the fall of '64. However, Stone was removed from command after the Battle of the Wilderness and accused of being drunk during the battle. What was Stone's relationship with U.S. Grant, and did Stone ever have the opportunity to clear his name?
To be honest, I doubt that Grant even knew who he was.
Okay.
I think, as we get to the Wilderness, Grant knows some officers in the Army of the Potomac. He obviously knows Meade. He knows Meade's staff. He probably knows, the Corps commanders. There's division commanders that Grant doesn't even know at that point. Mm-hmm. So he probably has no idea who Stone is. So May the 5th was probably the worst day of Stone's military career. I mean, he performed well in Virginia in 1862. He performed well here. He may have been drunk. It's hard to say. I mean, he does act rather erratically at the Wilderness. One of the theories is that he's still in a lot of pain from the pelvic injury he sustained here, and he may be self-medicating with commissary whiskey. Who knows? Gets thrown from his horse at the Wilderness, refractures his pelvis. Shortly after that, he does submit a letter of resignation in, I believe, late June or early July of 1862, and it's not accepted. Or, excuse me, 1864, and it's not accepted. Instead, he gets transferred to 2 non-combat jobs. He first he's sent to Camp Curtin, and he commands Camp Curtin for a period of a couple months, and then he ends up in Alton, Illinois, in charge of a military prison out there. And then he does resign his commission finally in January of 1865. So, yeah. And he comes back to active duty in the Spanish-American War.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He's a brigadier general in the Spanish-American War on the staff of Nelson Miles.
Oh, wow.
Serving in Puerto Rico.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, and then our last question, we have 2 from Katie Von D. She has, let's see, what does she want to know here? What happened to the wounded after the Macpherson farm was occupied by the rebels?
Most of the accounts seem to indicate that they're not getting a great deal of care, except from walking wounded who are out here. Until
so other wounded who are able to care for the severely wounded.
Exactly.
Okay.
Apparently there's no surgeons that were out here. Apparently the Confederates didn't leave any surgeons in this area. So these poor guys are in the barn. There's some in the house.
Yeah.
There's some laying around the farmyard.
Yeah, like where we're sitting now is probably just
there were probably some wounded out here. Exactly.
And isn't this the barn where that story that the ghost tours love to tell about the man who wakes up in the pile of dead? Isn't
That's
that where
actually
that takes place?
no. That's over on Seminary Ridge.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, that's the barn at the what's the house across the street from the Thompson house, the White House that sits there.
Oh.
Who owned that at the time of the battle? Do you remember? Is that Rogers?
On the Emmitsburg Road, are we talking?
No.
Here.
Up at the seminary.
Right across from
Right across from the Thompson house. Right across from Lee's
I don't
headquarters.
remember, but I know what you mean.
And the story, that's where that story allegedly took place with the guy lying under a pile of dead bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah, where they were in a hurry
Yeah.
to bury the dead,
Yeah.
or whoever did
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, because we were just up over, we did a show a couple weeks ago from the seminary, and they were saying how they were wounded all over the place there and with no medical care at all.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, it's not too far away, and it's not unique to that place if you're a Union soldier wounded.
So if you're wounded out here, if you're here in the Macpherson barn, you're really not getting any care probably until July the 5th. When the Confederates begin to withdraw from this area, and then Union medical personnel start to come out here and tend to the wounded.
Yeah. We kind of touched on this before when we were talking about bogus versus real bucktails, but Katie also wants to know what kind of relations did the 3 bucktail regiments have with each other as veterans organizations after the war?
That's where the problems seem to crop up.
Okay.
With the whole, we're the real bucktails and you're not type of thing. Although by the turn of the 20th century, that animosity seems to be fading as well, because that's when I believe the history of the 150th is written, I believe, in 1905, and I think the history of the 42nd is written roughly the same time, and they both kind of address this as something that we all share the honor, and let's put this behind us in those regimental histories. So it seems like that's fading over time.
Right. Okay. They're just too old to fight.
Pretty much.
They're over
Pretty
it all.
much, yeah. So.
All right. Anything you want to add to this, Rich or Bob, or anything?
Let me just mention one thing. And I wanted to make sure that I had my facts right before I came out here today, so I looked this up today. We've had a number of questions about Roy Stone, and I think he's one of those guys that kind of falls through the cracks when we talk about commanders at Gettysburg, and I think he performs extraordinarily well here. There's never been a full biography written of Roy Stone, but you can find a 90-page biography of him online on the Federal Highway Administration's website, of all places.
Really?
Okay? And the reason is, in 1893, what is the forerunner of the modern Federal Highway Administration was established as part of the Department of Agriculture. And Stone was the first director.
Really?
Yeah, so he is. He's a very prominent civil engineer after his Civil War service.
Wow.
He actually develops the first working monorail in the United States, which was exhibited in 1876 in Philadelphia at the exposition there.
Wow, really?
And you'll appreciate this, of course, being bicycle tours and such.
Sure.
His interest in what becomes the Federal Highway Administration was from bicyclists. And there was a group called the League of American Wheelmen.
Sure.
You heard of them?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And they were lobbying for improved roads in the 1880s and 1890s, and Stone kind of became their patron in Washington.
Oh, right.
And the Stone's Brigade tablet right over across the ridge from where we're sitting, the original tablet was damaged in an accident. That's the second tablet, and that was paid for by the Federal Highway Administration in 1993.
Wow.
So there's a very...
That is a cool story.
There's an excellent biography of this guy on the FHA website.
And that's actually how he ends up in Puerto Rico in 1898 on Nelson Miles' staff.
Bicycling?
No, he's doing engineering
He's his
work.
chief engineer?
He's doing engineering work primarily with road systems to resupply the army as it's campaigning in Puerto Rico.
Was he an engineer before the war?
He was a
or
lumberman,
ever?
so he's a self-taught engineer.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Did he suffer from his twice at least broken pelvis all his life?
See, he does, I couldn't find any post-Civil War references to it.
Okay.
My guess is he probably did.
Oh, I would imagine.
But it was severe enough by after the wilderness that he realizes I'm not going to be able to come back to the field.
And how old was he, or when did he die?
Dies in 1905, in New Jersey. He was in his, I want to say early to mid 60s. He probably died of malaria, which he contracted in the Spanish-American War. And that's probably what eventually kills him. He's buried in Arlington. He's just a few yards from the Lee Custis mansion up on the hill up there by in Arlington National Cemetery.
Where in New Jersey was he?
Mendham, New Jersey.
Oh, Mendham. That's right where
Doubleday,
I was.
I think, from, dies there too.
Oh, really?
I think so, yeah.
I did not know that. That's my area. That's where I grew up.
There you go.
That area. Any questions from the peanut gallery? It looks like Waylon's waving.
Is it true?
Yell it.
Is it true that the 149th was part of Lincoln's Bodyguard?
No. It's the 150th.
Oh.
Yeah, you were close. Okay. Company, one company, the 150th. I think it's Company K.
Company K, yeah.
When these regiments are first sent to Washington, the 149th and the 150th, they kind of get scattered all over the city. And Company K of the 150th ended up being assigned to the Soldiers' Home, which was kind of the Camp David of the Civil War period. And Lincoln liked the officers in charge, and he requested that they be his permanent bodyguard. So, yes, they are the guards at the Soldiers' Home for the entire war.
Actually, if you pay close attention when you watch the movie Lincoln, the Federal soldiers standing guard are all wearing bucktails.
Bucktails, yeah.
All of them.
Whoa. Spielberg knew this?
Yeah.
Spielberg
Rich,
is no slouch.
What about
no
Company
slouch.
D of the 149th? What are they doing?
Company
they're
D,
not part of
right. Company
this
D is
over
not
here.
out here with the rest of the regiment on the first day. They're Doubleday's headquarters guard.
Yeah.
So they're back at the seminary, and those guys end up, kind of fighting a rear guard action as the Union line at the seminary starts to fall apart. They're positioned over by the Schultz house over along the Fairfield Road. There's a small marker there to Company D. And they essentially cover the retreat of the rest of the First Corps. And then once everybody else has retreated towards town, then they pulled back. And they really pulled back, not through town, but more across country towards Cemetery Hill.
Kind of back the way they had come out
Right,
here.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Also, we haven't talked about it at all, but, you've mentioned that there's a fair amount of writing about the color episode.
Right.
What was the impetus behind that,
Okay.
and what is John Kenzel, the 150th, talking about?
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy about the fate of those flags, and this really starts with Lieutenant Colonel Hyde Cooper of the 150th. When Hyde Cooper wrote his official battle report, he said that when his regiment, the 150th, changed front, the 32nd North Carolina was advancing in front of them and had just captured the colors of the 149th. And he said he leads this counterattack that then saves the colors, and the colors are then restored to the 149th, and then they lost them a couple of hours later. So that never happened. The veterans of the 149th were obviously very upset when they read that this account, and Hyde Cooper's account gains a lot of traction. It's appeared in several books. It's in Pennsylvania Gettysburg. And it's really the primary reason that Heidekrupper gets his Medal of Honor in 1905.
Okay.
Is for recapturing those flags. John Bossler was the commander of Company C of the 149th, which is the color company. He spent the rest of his life trying to refute this story. And Bossler did correspond with members of the 150th, including a guy by the name of William Ramsey. Ramsey said it never happened, and he was in the charge across the road. But there's a guy named Jack Kensel who says, yeah, it did happen, and I captured the flags, and I'm the guy, and I should get a Medal of Honor. Well, Ramsey and several other members of the 150th said that Kensel basically got knocked in the head by a shell fragment right after they went into position over here by the Macpherson barn and never was in the rest of the fight. He was probably on the field about 15 minutes before he's being carted to the rear. And so he's definitely not part of this this counterattack. But he also said that Kensel was, and I think the quote is, not quite right in the head after the wound he sustained at Gettysburg. So.
I bet.
And I don't think it helped at all that Harry Kiefer published it in his book.
Recollections of a Drummer Boy, it's in there. And pretty much all of this is taken from Heidekrupper's initial account, which appears in his report, but it also appears in an article that was in one of the Philadelphia newspapers within 3 weeks of the battle.
Peggy, any questions? All right. Well, Rich, thank you very much for doing this. It's been well worth the 2-year wait to get you on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I really enjoyed having you on. Eric, great job. Eric, he's been dying to do this for months.
I really have.
This is like his thing. I've never seen you so alive.
Well, I mean, I have my own connection to the 149th and my own nefarious reasons for wanting to do this.
Well,
so my fourth great grandfather was in Company H,
okay,
and he was killed out here on the 1st. Somewhere. We don't really know the circumstances of how it happened. We just know he was killed on the 1st out here.
Okay. And what's the nefarious reason?
That's
between you and
as
yourself.
Nefarious as it gets, I guess.
All right. All right. Well, otherwise, thank you all for listening. And don't forget, if you want to submit questions, you got to become a patron. So patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg. And don't forget, like and share. And that's about it. Thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it. And take care. We'll talk to you next time. This is like